If there's one thing that I observe again and again in this podcasting space is that people tend to obsess over the things that don't necessarily help their podcast grow. Case in point, I see this all the time where people spend hours, if not days, obsessing over which microphone to buy. And honestly, while sound is an important aspect of your podcast, you could have the most amazing sound quality, but if you're not doing the right things to get actually in front of your listeners, you can have the most amazing sound on planet Earth. If people cannot find you, your work is done in vain. One of the biggest ways that I see actually people making a mistake is when it comes to their show notes, they are just totally ignoring it and not paying attention to this very important piece of the puzzle. So today we're going to talk about that. Honestly, I feel like show notes are one of those things that are really not even second thought to most podcasters. Most people are not paying attention to their show notes. They don't see the value in it. And it's something that when done correctly, your show notes can really help you grow. Now, before we go any further, I just want to say this. Show notes in and of itself, at least on Apple, does not help you rank higher in the algorithm, meaning if there are keywords in your show notes, it doesn't necessarily help you rank within search on Apple. However, I just know, I feel it in my bones, the day that Apple will start ranking show notes, they will start looking at the keywords in your show notes. So let's start now and prepare yourselves now so that later when the time comes, all of our podcast episodes are already optimized for search. The second thing is that while we focus heavily on Apple, it does not mean that we ignore every other platform. So I've said this before, but in my own podcast, I always optimize my show notes. I'm the queen of optimization. And I've had people, and this happens all the time, people go on Google and they search something and my show comes up. And this is because I am intentional about optimizing every single piece of my podcast for searchability, not just within Apple, but for other search engines as well. So let's talk about common mistakes that people make when it comes to show notes and what to do instead. Mistake number one is that you're not writing them, or if you are writing them, they're just not engaging. Listen, your show notes is valuable real estate, so use them. Don't just give me a two-liner on what the episode is about and something blah, blah, blah. Actually take the time to create thoughtful show notes that actually give me a glimpse into what the show is about. Now, a lot of times, you may think that just because you don't read show notes, it means that other people are not reading show notes. But there are the people out there who like to get a glimpse of what the episode is about before they commit. So think about the people who don't know who you are, but they want to commit to you before they actually listen to a 15, 20, 30-minute episode. Well, for a lot of people, it's important that they get an idea of what the episode is about. So they definitely go and read the show notes. So do not underestimate the power of writing really captivating show notes just because you yourself don't read them. So make sure that your show notes are engaging, that they hook people in, that they pique curiosity, that they actually engage people from the get-go. Even before they listen to your episode, they know that your episode is going to be valuable for them. So do not sleep on writing super engaging show notes to hook people in and get them to stick around. Mistake number two that people make when it comes to their show notes is that they give a super detailed breakdown of what's in the episode. Now, here's my problem with that. You may think that you're being super helpful and you're giving all the details and the ins and outs, but if I don't know who you are and I'm looking for something very specific and I am using the podcast app like a search engine, which, by the way, newsflash, the podcast app is a search engine, so use it as such. If I go to the show notes and you have, a detailed explanation of the exact same thing that I'm looking for, and I can read your explanation in 2 minutes, why in the world would I commit to listening to your 15-minute episode when I have the breakdown right there and I I already read it and I know, and I came and I saw and I conquered. I'm going to leave. I'm going to bounce because guess what? I have other things to do. So again, remember, your show notes should be engaging and they should hook people in and they should pique curiosity, but do not give a super detailed breakdown of what's inside of your episode, because then I have absolutely zero reason to actually stick around and listen to your episode because I already read it in the show notes. Mistake number 3, and this is going to be super controversial, but listen, I'm here for controversy. I'm here for things that actually work. And if anything, if there's one thing that I want you to get out of this podcast is that you need to think outside of the box. So just because, Joe Schmo does it and Joe Schmo has a successful podcast and this person does it, does not mean that you should be doing this. And this controversial piece of advice is timestamps. Again, listen. You have to think about the people who are landing on your podcast who have no clue who you are, okay? So then they typed up something in the search bar, your podcast came up, and they go to the show notes and they see that the one thing that they're looking for is at, 5 minutes and 15 seconds. So what do? They scroll to that thing, to the specific point in your podcast episode, and they listen just to that little sound bite. Now, here's the thing. You may think that you're being helpful. You may think that you're just saving people time. But again, going back to the previous point, if somebody is not actually engaging with me and they don't understand the background story of why I'm giving this piece of advice and they don't have the whole context of what I'm saying, that can cause problems because one, they're never going to become clients of mine. They're not going to engage with me. They could potentially take the one thing that I said and completely take it out of context and start an uproar online, which it's very possible. So this is why I am against putting timestamps on show notes, because if all I'm doing is going to the specific timestamp on your actual episode and I'm not listening to everything else and I'm getting that one piece of advice completely out of context, okay? It does not help you. It does not help me as a listener. So again, go back to point number 1, which is to make your show notes hooking. Is that a word? Well, maybe not. You want your show notes to hook people in, to pique curiosity, to entice them to come and listen to you, but to give show notes and then make it so that people can go to this exact point in your episode and just listen to the one piece of advice and then just bounce and not engage with you ever again. I don't think it's helpful to you. I don't think it's helpful to the person listening. And especially if you have something that is more involved, like you have a health podcast, maybe you're talking about specific diet or something like that. You do not want people to get a 2-minute piece of advice from you that's completely out of context from everything that you do. You definitely want people to have an immersive experience and really learn about you and what you do and the work that you create and how you help. So please, timestamps, they've got to go. They're really not helping you. And I know it's controversial and I know that so many podcasters do it, but it doesn't help you. So boom, say goodbye to timestamps because no, it's just a no. The next mistake you are making is that you are not using keywords. Now, remember the beginning I said that as of today, Apple does not rank your keywords. So you can put in a very specific keyword that you mentioned in your show notes and your podcast episode is not going to come up because you use that keyword and you optimize for the keyword. But like I said, I can see the day and the time that it will change and that Apple will start doing it. So start optimizing your show notes as of today. Remember, there are more search engines out there other than the Apple podcast. So just because Apple doesn't do it doesn't mean that other places don't do it. So if you have, for example, your podcast over on YouTube, you definitely want to have those keywords in there to make sure that it's helping you come up higher in search. So in general, it's just a very good idea for you to go ahead and put those keywords because in general, the way that search engines work is that you have your main keyword and then you have your supporting keywords and that just signals to the search engine like, hey, this is what the show is about and let's put this person in this category. So the more information that you can give to the search engines, the better off you are in ranking higher and actually being able to reach your ideal listeners who will then turn into ideal clients. So do not sleep on optimizing your show notes and putting in those juicy keywords in there. Now, please do not just pick 10 keywords and put them in there and throw them in because that's not how search engines work. You actually need to write them in and make sure that it makes sense, that it's made so a human being can read it. So if you think that you can just copy and paste keywords in your show notes and that it'll help you, it won't. You still have to go back to number one, which is the most important piece, I think, which is make engaging show notes that hook people in and actually tell a little bit of a story, piques their interest, and has your keywords in them. The next mistake that I see people making when it comes to writing your show notes is that they don't have any links and they don't have any call to actions. Now, here's the thing. Putting links, for example, back to your website will help with backlinking to your website. Now, backlinking is for the SEO geeks out there, and I'm not going to go into that right now, but it does help with building authority on your website. So it's an easy thing to do. If you do nothing at all, put your website on there so you can actually help build authority to your website. And if you know anything about websites and building authority, you know it takes a hot minute. So we want to make sure that we are using that as much as possible whenever possible. Another thing too is that if I'm listening to your podcast episode and I'm liking what you have to say and I want to work with you, make it easy for me as a listener to be in touch with you. So put in links on there that make life easier for me, because if you're making me jump through hoops and have to go find you in the interwebs, and meanwhile my kids are coming in and they're screaming over Legos and they're fighting and these things, guess what? You have lost me forever, because now I am here dealing with my kids. So make it easy for me to just be able to click on something and be able to go to your website or to sign up for a discovery call with you or to buy a program. Just make life simple for me. Put in those links in your show notes. Now, remember what I said earlier about SEO optimizing your show notes, but that not actually helping you as of yet, at least not on Apple search engines? Here's the thing. What really does help you is you focusing on the keywords in your titles. So go back and listen to episode 286, where I give you the breakdown of keywords and how to title your podcast for success. And if you're not yet subscribed to this podcast, make sure that you do subscribe, because next week we are talking about how to recycle content from your podcast into other things. And show notes, guess what? Show notes is definitely one of the ways that we can recycle content into other pieces of content for other platforms. So instead of you creating content for Instagram and TikTok and then writing an email to promote your podcast and this thing and that thing, I'm going to help you make your podcast the main thing to simplify your life. And then from there, we're going to grab content, and I'm going to go into that into next week's episode. So make sure you subscribe and listen in. And until next time, may you find God's grace, peace, mercy, and love. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.